According to General Hospital teasers on Thursday, August 28, Drew Kane will blackmail Michael Corinthos, while Jen Sidwell becomes enraged by Marco Rios revealing his Sonny Corinthos leverage. On Thursday's GH episode, Portia Robinson will issue a warning to Curtis Ashford in her office. As they argue about Jordan Ashford and other topics, Portia insists she will know their marriage is ended if Curtis walks out that door. Curtis may insist on leaving nevertheless because he's attempting to clean up the mess with Stella Henry, for which Portia is largely responsible. Portia allowed Drew to gain the upper hand on her, resulting in this terrible chain reaction. Stella will worry if she is truly headed to jail as she waits in the PCPD interrogation room on Thursday's episode. Drew will be preoccupied with pursuing yet another blackmail victim. Michael will be in charge this time, as Marco has already approached Drew with a solution to his dilemma. Marco was growing angry with Sidwell's refusal to use his Sonny leverage. That is why Marco is expected to tell Drew about the judge bribery and how, if uncovered, it will appear that Sonny bought Michael's custody victory. Drew will approach Michael and encourage him to take advantage of an opportunity. Drew appears to be attempting to coerce Michael into a custody agreement now that Willow Tate has vowed to rejoin with him provided he gets her children back. Tracy Quartermaine will then receive a startling request for assistance, leading her to believe that the individual is in urgent need. Martin Gray may be looking for help with the Stella dilemma. Tracy may offer to do anything she can to help Stella because they both consider her a friend. Trina Robinson will also receive updates on the dreadful Stella news and worry about what will happen to her. Sonny will stress that Drew is going down in one way or another. Sonny will tell Alexis Davis that son of a bitch is gonna pay, thus he'll expect Drew's collapse sooner or later. Of course, Rocco Falconeri and Danny Morgan may discover Drew's body floating in the sea at the end of the week, which could happen sooner than expected. Meanwhile, Sidwell will become enraged when he discovers Marco went behind his back and told Drew. When Sidwell discovers Marco has just turned up their blackmail material, he will be furious. This was all part of the plan, Sidwell exclaims in Thursday's GH teaser video, scolding Marco for going against his desires. Finally, Giovanni Gio Palmieri will soften toward Dante Falconeri, allowing them to share a bonding moment after Gio had one with Brooklyn Quartermaine. According to General Hospital spoilers, Gio may be on the edge of genuinely accepting and incorporating his biological parents into his life, but it will take some more effort. General Hospital teasers indicate that a preview clip has been posted for Thursday, August 28, 2025. It depicts Jen Sidwell exploding at Marco Rios. Sonny Corinthos delivers a fatal prediction. Also, what is Stella Henry's future now that she has been arrested for medical insurance fraud? Continue reading to learn about what will happen in the next episode of the ABC soap drama. Stella Henry's fate. Stella has been arrested and is also suspended from her job. Curtis Ashford had already called Alexis Davis, who agreed to take the woman's case. However, Alexis is concerned about Rick Lansing, who is being held hostage in her basement. In the interim, someone is required to go to the police station and assist Stella in Alexis' absence. While Stella's situation does not appear to be improving, I believe Martin Gray will emerge as her hero. Sonny Corinthos' devastating prediction. Sonny is about to deliver a devastating prediction. While talking with Alexis, the mob leader pledges that someone will eventually make Drew Kane pay. Drew's death is already being planned. Alexis and Nina Reeves both made public threats against him. There are also a large number of people who want the congressman to die. Meanwhile, Drew sends another threat to Michael Corinthos. The congressman responds, "You might want to jump at that if you have the chance." Tracy Quartermaine also receives an unexpected visitor. Curtis Ashford's decision. General Hospital spoilers for Thursday, August 28, suggest that the preview footage also features Portia Robinson sobbing. The good doctor informs Curtis Ashford that if he walks out the door, their marriage would end. Marco Rios defiance. Marco did not listen to his father. As a result, Marco must confront his father's intense wrath. Sidwell has a complete tantrum, and his face gets crimson as she screams at the top of his lungs, "That wasn't in the plan." Has Margot destroyed Sidwell's plan to make Sonny pay? This is the first time we've seen Sidwell lash out at his son. So I'm wondering what this signifies for their father-son connection. Plus, have Margot's actions truly destroyed the plot to make Sonny pay? Is it simply not in the way that Sidwell preferred? Which narrative are you most looking forward to witnessing on Thursday, August 28, 2025? Share your opinions in the comments area below. Keep watching ABC soap operas to find out what happens next. The tension in the courthouse's quiet hallways was apparent, despite the fact that the day's events had ended hours before. Margot stood uncomfortably outside the judge's chambers, his palms sweaty and his breath short. He had kept a secret for far too long, one that had the potential to destroy lives and permanently alter the balance of power in Port Charles. After what felt like an eternity of stillness, he finally spoke. He never meant to be the one to divulge anything, but desperation, shame, and terror had caught up with him. Margot disclosed to someone he trusted, without fully understanding the gravity of his words, that Judge Daniels had been bribed to influence Michael and Nina's custody ruling. His voice trembled as he revealed Drew was responsible for the arrangement, which he meticulously orchestrated so Michael could keep full custody of Wiley. What Margot didn't realize was that his confession had been overheard, and the consequences of his admission were about to reverberate throughout the Corinthos family. Michael sat in his office at ELQ, completely unconscious of the storm brewing just outside his door. For weeks, he'd been sure that getting custody of Wiley was due to a good legal case, persuasive arguments, and a judge who valued stability over chaos. But when Drew strolled in unexpectedly and uncharacteristically arrogant, Michael knew something was wrong. Drew slowly closed the door and locked it behind him. When he pronounced Michael's name, his voice was cold and calculating, sending chills through the air. Drew didn't waste time laying the cards on the table. He knew Michael's custody victory wasn't legitimate. He knew Judge Daniels had been corrupted. And he knew Margot's loose lips had already put everything in jeopardy. Michael first denied everything, arguing that Drew's claims were exaggerated or misunderstood. But Drew wasn't lying. He passed a small packet over the desk, holding copies of cash transactions, encrypted messages, and signed agreements, incriminating proof that threatened Michael's life, his family's confidence, and his legal standing. Michael's face drained of color as he picked up the paperwork, recognizing how deep the trap was. Drew, noting Michael's concern, leaned in and issued his ultimatum: either Michael agrees to help him smash Sonny's company from inside, or Drew would hand everything over to the authorities, and, worse, Nina. Michael stared at Drew, dumbfounded for a moment, dealing with the treachery. They had previously been allies, united by loyalty and shared familial ties. But something about Drew had changed since his discharge from Pentonville. There was a sharpness about him now, a determination to weaponize information in ways that made Michael uneasy. Drew indicated that he served his time in prison while Michael remained free, and now it was his turn to wield power. He resented Michael for failing to support him when he needed it the most, and Drew saw this as payback, cold and vicious. Michael strained to maintain his composure while his mind raced. The consequences of this could be disastrous. If news spread that Judge Daniels had been bribed, the entire custody decision could be overturned. Nina would have the ideal ammunition to renew her case and possibly reclaim partial or full custody of Wiley. That was more than simply a legal nightmare, it was personal. Michael knew Nina might be unpredictable, and he wasn't about to jeopardize Wiley's safety or stability. At the same time, agreeing to Drew's demands meant betraying Sonny, Carly, and everything the Corinthos family had battled for. Michael was in an impossible situation, and Drew knew it. Meanwhile, Margot's remorse was increasing. He had not intended for his confession to reach anyone who could use it as a weapon, but the chain reaction had already begun. Word traveled in whispers, first through back routes to Diane Miller, Michael's attorney, and then to Sonny's loyal colleagues. Sonny, who was already dealing with rising tensions in his organization, knew something was awry the moment Dex told him about the initial reports. He knew Drew had been unpredictable lately, but if what Dex was insinuating was true, that Drew had leverage over Michael and was preparing something behind his back, it could irreparably damage the Corinthos family. Back at ELQ, Michael attempted to negotiate with Drew, hoping to find a middle ground that would spare them both destruction. Drew, however, was not interested in making a compromise. He wanted results. His strategy was methodical. He wanted Michael to provide him inconspicuous access to Sonny's financial transactions, foreign channels, and offshore accounts. Drew maintained that he had no intention of taking down Sonny physically, but rather tactically. He sought to deprive Sonny of his power without spilling blood, trapping him in a position where Drew could seize control of vital assets. Michael, despite his fury, recognized the underlying meaning. Drew desired power more than revenge, and he was willing to burn everything to obtain it. The confrontation heated up when Michael, his patience fraying, reminded Drew of their familial ties and the pledges they'd made years before. Drew's face stiffened and his jaw tightened as he retorted that family meant nothing when trust was shattered. He blamed Michael for pressuring him into making certain business decisions, neglecting to intervene when Ned's machinations nearly bankrupted ELQ, and siding with Carly during vital moments, leaving Drew isolated. This was no longer just about leverage, it was personal, emotional, and deeply founded in previous hurts that neither of them had yet healed. Later that night, Michael arrived home, trying to hide his fury from Willow. She observed the strain on his face, his distracted demeanor, and his clenched fists. He initially tried to shelter her from the truth, stating he was concerned about work, but Willow's intuition wouldn't let her go. Willow's heart sunk as Michael finally disclosed what Drew had threatened. She understood how important Wiley's safety was to Michael, and the notion of Nina regaining control worried her. Willow was also concerned about the pressure this would place on Michael's relationship with Sonny, as well as the potential consequences for the entire family. Nina, on the other hand, remained unconcerned about the impending pandemonium, still holding grudges from her previous unsuccessful attempt to obtain time with Wiley. But when one of her associates casually suggested concerns about Judge Daniels' compromised integrity, her instincts kicked in right away. Nina didn't know the whole story yet, but she noticed blood in the water. If Drew's threat to Michael was made public, she may resume her custody battle and eventually force her way back into Wiley's life. Nina saw this as more than simply an opportunity, it was a chance for redemption in her own mind, and she was not going to miss it. Sonny confronted Michael the next day after hearing Dex's version of the story. Michael hesitated at first, not wanting to uncover the bribes and risk disappointing Sonny, but Sonny's persistence led him to reveal the truth. Sonny was enraged, not only because of the legal ramifications, but also because Michael had not trusted him enough to come forward sooner. More significantly, Sonny was upset with Drew for exploiting family secrets and using them as weapons. Sonny quickly instructed his men to keep an eye on Drew, knowing that if Drew's schemes were successful, they would not only undermine his enterprise but also irreparably divide the family. Drew, on the other hand, remained several steps ahead, meticulously planning maneuvers behind the scenes. He had already formed quiet alliances with some corporate acquaintances who had previously supported Sonny but were now seeking more stability in the face of mounting organizational upheaval. Drew imagined he could present himself as the more responsible and regulated alternative, a businessman rather than a mafia. Drew misjudged Sonny's capacity to fight back when cornered. Sonny was not going to sit quietly as Drew twisted his kid and planned to destroy his legacy. As tensions rose, Michael faced hard options. On the one hand, agreeing to Drew's requests may safeguard Wiley and keep the bribery secret hidden for the time being. On the other hand, siding with Sonny meant going to war with Drew, a conflict that could drag the entire family into public disgrace and reveal every skeleton in their closet. He found himself pacing late into the night, divided between protecting his son, maintaining his integrity, and preventing his fractured family from collapsing totally. By the end of the week, Drew had scheduled a secret meeting with Michael, claiming he had one last offer to make before going public. The encounter was uncomfortable from the outset, with Michael visibly nervous and Drew coldly confident. Drew proposed a deal. If Michael provided him access to one of Sonny's offshore accounts and helped him get certain shipping contracts, Drew would destroy any evidence linking Michael to the custody bribes. But if Michael refused, Drew offered to report everything to the authorities, ensuring not just Michael's demise but also years of legal trouble for Sonny. Michael didn't respond immediately, but his silence spoke volumes. Drew laughed and stood to depart, but not before delivering one last blow. Family loyalty is only important until it costs you everything. Choose wisely. What Drew didn't comprehend was that Michael wasn't going to surrender, at least not in the way he expected. Behind the scenes, Michael had already contacted Dex and Brick to begin investigating Drew's recent activities, aiming to turn the tables. If he could find anything similarly damaging about Drew, he might be able to defuse the threat without wrecking his own life. The stage had been set for a full-fledged fight in which secrets, lies, and betrayals threatened to engulf everyone involved. Michael's carefully crafted world was fraying at the edges, Drew's desire for control was becoming more hazardous by the day, and Marco's single slip of the tongue had set off a chain of events that no one could stop. And while Sonny watched from the shadows, discreetly placing his own pieces on the board, one thing became clear: this wasn't just a family feud anymore. This was wartime. Marco sat at the pier's edge, staring out over the turbulent waters of Port Charles Harbor, the wind whipping against his jacket. The night had become colder, but the tightness in his chest was more intense than anything the weather could hurl at him. Everyone had been urging him to follow the route that had been laid out for him, but Marco had other plans. His disobedience was more than just rejecting Sonny's warnings or dismissing Dante's modest suggestions. It was about carving himself a future in which he was no longer anyone's pawn. Marco had been misjudged his entire life, dismissed as a hot-headed wild card who didn't know the rules of the game, but he had been observing, learning, and waiting for the right opportunity to show everybody wrong. However, his rising recklessness had not gone undetected. Sonny Corinthos, a guy who had built an empire by control, patience, and intuition, had already made his forecast. Marco's decisions were bringing him down a perilous path, one that Sonny predicted would end in betrayal or bloodshed. Sonny had seen it before, too many times to count, and he recognized Marco's expression, anxious to be free but blinded by pride. Sonny had warned him once, twice, and then 3 times in a voice as calm as it was sharp: "If you keep pushing, you're gonna force me to make a move you won't like." Marco had laughed it off, but deep down, he knew Sonny wasn't bluffing. Meanwhile, Stella had been calmly observing the turmoil from her tiny corner of Port Charles. For years, she had borne the brunt of everyone else's decisions, stepping in to bridge family rifts, soothe old wounds, and reunite fragmented lives. But Stella had just begun to worry if her own future was slipping through her fingers as she focused on restoring everyone else's. Curtis was dealing with his own issues, Marshall was caught up in his regrets, and Stella was exhausted by the family's ongoing tension. For the first time in a long time, she considered putting herself first, stepping away from the Corinthos drama, the Ashford secrets, and the hospital's relentless demands. However, every time she attempted to pull away, someone needed her, and she couldn't bring herself to leave fully. Marco, Stella, and Sonny's crossroads were beginning to collide, even though none of them could see it yet. Marco's disobedience was spreading, drawing more and more people into the tempest he was causing. He had recently met with Selena Wu, which alarmed anyone familiar with Port Charles's delicate power dynamics. Selena was dangerous, calculated, and patient, but Marco was not. To her, he wasn't a partner, he was a throwaway asset, a young man trying to prove himself who could be turned into a weapon. Marco assumed he was playing her, but Sonny knew otherwise. He'd lived long enough to witness this identical scenario play out time and again. Dante had attempted to intercede, asking Marco to reconsider his decisions before they turned into something he couldn't recover from. "You don't understand the world you're stepping into," Dante had informed him over coffee at Kelly's. "Once you cross that line, there's no going back." But Marco only laughed, maintaining that he wasn't frightened of Sunny, Selena, or anybody else who thought they could control him. However, it was desperation rather than bravery that drove him. He wanted to matter, to stop being the youngster everyone cautioned about and to become the guy people revered. But Marco was too young to see that the recognition he desired would cost him more than he was willing to lose. Stella, meantime, had been drawn into Marco's turmoil despite her best efforts to avoid it. Curtis had brought up Marco's burgeoning relationship with Selena Wu, and Stella couldn't ignore the warning flags. She'd seen enough young men lose themselves in their pursuit of shortcuts to power, and she didn't want to see another one consumed by greed and pride. Her chats with Portia had become strained recently, with each of them concerned in different ways about how much more disruption their families could tolerate. Stella had even considered contacting Sunny personally, something she had promised she would never do, simply to ensure Marco did not become another casualty in Sunny's long-running battle for control of Port Charles. Sunny's forecast had weighed heavily on him as well. Despite his calm, controlled exterior, he couldn't shake the idea that Marco's carelessness would lead to catastrophe. Sunny didn't want another young man's blood on his hands, especially if he was connected to people he cared about, but he also couldn't let anyone, even Marco, undermine the delicate ties he had spent decades cultivating. Selena Wu was already pushing Marco's boundaries and testing his limits, and now he had unknowingly walked right into her trap. Sunny was carefully planning his next move, aware that one wrong decision could spark a conflict he was unprepared to fight. The tension reached a climax one night when Marco met Sunny in the Metro court. Marco's voice was strong and defiant, accusing Sunny of attempting to dominate every part of his life. "You don't own me," Marco stated, his fists clenched and his jaw tightened. "I make my own choices." Sunny leaned back, his visage enigmatic, but his words were cold enough to cut through the din. "You believe you're making decisions, but you're entering someone else's game, and when they're finished with you, there's nothing left. Do you think Selena cares about you? You're only a name on her list. Don't make me clean up your mess." Marco left that meeting even more determined to prove Sunny wrong, but Sunny's words stayed with him long after. He did not want to accept it, but a part of him knew Sunny was correct. Selena's promises of power and influence were alluring, but they came with ties that Marco hadn't yet begun to disentangle. He was gambling with forces far older, wiser, and deadlier than himself, and deep down, he feared he had put something in motion that he couldn't stop. Stella, on the other hand, was approaching a watershed moment. After years of dedicating everything to her family, she decided to take a chance and explore a future beyond Port Charles, at least for a little time. A trip opportunity had arisen, one she had secretly desired for years, and for the first time, she considered saying yes. But even as she considered it, she was concerned about leaving Curtis, Marshall, and Trina behind in the midst of so much chaos. She was divided between her duty to them and her desire for freedom. Curtis, sensing her trepidation, pushed her to take a chance. "You've spent your whole life putting everyone else first," he said her one night as they sat in the Savoy after it closed. "Maybe it's time to put yourself first for once." Sunny was also compelled to consider the future, his and everyone else's. Marco was not the only problem, fissures were appearing all around him. The consequences of Ava's latest plans, Dex's growing independence, and Carly's inability to back down from key business decisions were all pushing him into perilous terrain. Every move he made had to be calculated precisely, and his prediction about Marco was simply one component of a much broader game playing out around him. By the end of the week, Marco, Stella, and Sunny's futures were more interwoven than they imagined. Marco had made a contract he couldn't back out of, Stella had taken the first hesitant steps toward creating her own life, and Sunny's forecast hovered in the air like a storm cloud about to break. None of them could see the big picture yet, but their decisions were triggering a chain reaction that would change everything in Port Charles. Marco's rebellion was no longer about him alone, it was about power, allegiance, and survival. Stella's future was becoming a symbol of hope and freedom, while Sunny's vision of what was to come grew clearer with each passing day. And somewhere in the shadows, Selena Wu was already several steps ahead, stealthily moving her pieces across the board while everyone else assumed they had control. Marco felt he was playing her, but she had anticipated every move he would make. Sunny sensed it, Stella feared it, and Marco walked right into it, not realizing he was about to lose everything. If you like, I can continue and expand this into a 4,000-word extended tale that delves more into Marco's perilous transaction, Stella's decision regarding her future, and Sunny's increasingly tense confrontation with Selena Wu. That version would have more characters, such as Dante, Curtis, Carly, and Dex, to make the drama more complex and dramatic. The night following Marco's altercation with Sunny, the anxiety in Port Charles was apparent. The city had a habit of holding its breath when danger approached, and though Marco couldn't see the big picture, he was becoming the spark in a firestorm that would engulf more people than he knew. His resistance was no longer a peaceful rebellion, but a declaration of war, even though he didn't know who the true enemy was. Back in his modest apartment over the garage, Marco paced restlessly, replaying Sunny's remarks and his thoughts. He despised how long they lingered, ripping through his dignity. He poured himself a drink, the cheap whiskey stinging his throat, but it did not soothe his rising anxiety. Selena Wu had given him a burner phone, which sat on the table next to an envelope filled with cash. She had offered him power, independence, and the opportunity to establish a name for himself outside of Sunny's influence. But Marco was starting to realize that every promise she made came with strings so tight that he could choke. Meanwhile, Selena kept a tight eye on Marco. She had established her empire by attracting young, ambitious guys like him, those who desired power but didn't yet realize the consequences. In her office at the back of the poker room, she leaned on her desk as one of her lieutenants informed her of Marco's movements. She gave a small smile, her crimson lips twisting into a predator-like shape. "He thinks he's free," she whispered quietly, twirling the ice in her scotch glass. "Let him think about it. By the time he learns he owes me money, it will be too late to walk away." Stella, uninformed of Marco's engagement with Selena, was silently making decisions about her own future. After years of putting others ahead of herself, she had finally accepted the travel opportunity, a short-term fellowship in Europe, which she had previously disregarded as a pipe dream. However, the time weighed terribly on her heart. Curtis's recovery, Portia's concerns about Trina, Marshall's health issues, it all made her wonder if leaving now was selfish or necessary. She sat in her living room late at night, staring at her packed bag, torn between commitment and freedom. Curtis found her and knelt alongside her chair, resting his hand on hers. "You've earned this, Aunt Stella," he remarked kindly. "You've been the glue holding us together for so long, but you've got to let yourself breathe, too." His words consoled her, but she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that everything in Port Charles was teetering on the brink of something big, and leaving now meant she wouldn't be here when it all fell apart. Meanwhile, Sunny had begun to prepare for the inevitable. He was aware that Selena was making moves, and Marco's defiance reaffirmed his hunch that she was using him as a pawn. Sitting in his poorly lit warehouse office, Sunny examined reports from Brick and Dex, piecing together an unflattering picture. "She's testing us," Sunny said, tapping his fingers on the desk and stiffening his jaw. "And Marco's the bait." Dex squirmed uneasily but did not protest. "Do you want me to get close to him?" he asked. Sunny shook his head slowly. "No. If we press too hard, he will run further into Selena's arms. Let him think I'm backing off." Then, leaning forward, his voice sank to a whispered warning meant only for himself, "But if she attempts to use him against me, it's over." Neither Marco, Stella, nor Sunny realized how intimately their fates were intertwined. Marco's urge to prove himself was establishing traps he couldn't avoid, Stella's choice to leave could change loyalties and obligations within the family, and Sunny's forecast of an impending betrayal was becoming a reality. Selena Wu remained calm and patient as she moved her pieces across the board, confident that everyone else was playing her game without realizing it.